Hey everyone, welcome to another video. I'm excited to get into today's topic. This is going to be a simple video that I think will be very helpful to a lot of you. I've had a lot of questions asking me what it's like when I'm doing my pre-market outlooks for the entire week. This is basically pre-market open on Sundays. Usually what I do is I do my markups on Saturday or Sunday, and I do a higher time frame down to the lower time frame analysis with refinements if possible. And my whole goal is basically to get an understanding of what I can expect to happen for the upcoming week. Now, as I do that, what's important to note is that I'm also modifying these every single pre-session that I trade. So when I'm trading London, usually I will add to these within 1 to 2 hours before the market opens. And the reason why is I make little changes to consider every previous day, right? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you live how I'm doing my weekly outlook. I'm going to give you basically my system for how I organize my charts so well, right? So that I can prevent getting, let's say, overwhelmed with too much data, right? So I can keep my charts super clean. I'm going to show you how to organize your charts. And I'm also going to show you why I mark out certain levels and what my thought process is as I'm looking at this with a fresh set of eyes, right? So I've been doing these weekly, every week in the Discord, my forever free Discord. So if you want to see them, I'm only going to post this one on YouTube because this is a how-to one for this. Now, if you want to catch the next ones, they're in the Discord, links in the description. It's forever free, right? So let's get into this. This is a simpler video. Basically, what I like to do is I start everything on the weekly time frame, right? Usually what I always want to know is I will be able to see what's to the left, right? Now, previously, as we were, very aggressive to the downside, when we were in these areas, if I had to look to the left, I had to look all the way over here, right? Now, the good thing is what we currently have is price to the left of current price action. We have this swing next to us, right? So what I'm always going to be doing is look at the most recent swing for the time frames that I'm looking at. So what I want to start with is that I'm going to mark the high, right? So pull back, we form this high, down to this most recent low. And what I can see from here on this time frame is on the weekly time frame, the most recent swing, which I can mark out as a range. So supply range, we form this low to this high. This is the supply range that broke structure to the downside, right? At the same time, what do we have? Here we have a change of character on the weekly. So buy to sell, that makes that low, right? And then this technically is a sell to buy range. And so here we have formed a weak, it's currently considered weak because it has not broken structure. So I would say that the supply range above is strong as this broke structure because this has yet to break structure. In order to break structure, this has to take this high on the weekly time frame. So at this moment, I would say this is weak weekly demand, right? But what I want to understand here is by marking out the high and the low weekly range, is I want to know where we are in current price. So what I can see is we are just shy of tapping the weekly supply range, but we did, for example, come into the EQ, and we did close the week with a slightly bearish or exhausted weekly candle, right? So what I'm always going to do is I want to start with this because I want to know where could we be heading. At this moment, I know that the weekly is bearish, right? So basically break of structure, bearish. We haven't had a break of structure bullish necessarily. At this moment, I can say that the weekly is bearish in structure, but the order flow is currently bullish, right? So that's just something I'm keeping in mind. I would not really mark this out because I'm not going to mark, for example, a break here because we have yet to come into the supply. I still want to see price come into the supply before we break. I want to see price take this high. I wouldn't want to consider this at this moment. I would say this is more of a change of character, right? It's not something I'm going to mark as a break of structure yet, right? The weekly, this is a weekly swing. So now that we've come into this equilibrium, I can see that potentially price is already showing some hints to pulling back, right? And this is a weak demand at this moment. So we're going to see what happens, right? So the other thing that I want to acknowledge is I always want to mark out the last week's range. So there's no new candles right now because this market's closed. What I want to do is I want to mark this high, and I'm going to mark this low. And the reason why is because when I look at the previous week candle, what that allows me to see is this allows me to see the strength where the momentum and the let's say whether we're showing high volume and momentum in alignment with for example with a commitment, right? So when we have high volume and high momentum with commitment, we print full-bodied candles, right? For example, like this was a sign of high volume and momentum creating a bearish swing to the downside, right? Full-bodied candle closure, right? When we have commitment, right, we have clean structure. But when we have volatility, which is basically high volume, high momentum, but no commitment, that shows us that we're going to sweep many sides, we're going to show unclean structure. And so this is my first sign that the previous week was already showing some sort of exhaustion or weakness in terms of buying. So what we could be forming is, could we potentially be forming a sell to buy that pushes price higher, or are we going to, for example, see that potentially we get a reversal from this point and form a new low? Because if we look at current previous structure, we have what? Sell, right? Here we have the buy, the pullback, and we break structure, right? It was time for a pullback. This could be a pullback and then continuation to break structure. So we're unsure, right? But this is something that I want to keep in mind. Now to organize my chart, I'm going to look to the right side of my screen. I have the object tree, so this is something I use all the time. It's very important to keep your chart organized because you want to be able to toggle between different time frames and to understand what it is you're currently looking at so that you can always have that insight to the higher time frame, right? So now we have an idea of the weekly range. We currently are showing some potential signs of reversal at the EQ or some exhaustion. So now let's take a look at this on the daily time frame. So here, now that we've clicked on the daily time frame, what I want to start with is I want to mark out my structure. So I tend to look for the most recent break of structure because that's always going to provide some simplicity. Now, because I did start on the higher time frame, I don't have to just look at random places in the chart. I can always just look at the weekly range, right? Because this, for example, shows us what? A daily break of structure, right? This is a buy to sell that breaks structure, right? And then what do we have? This is considered protected and strong as it broke structure, but then it gets taken. So we have a sell to buy. This is the weekly range, that's demand. Currently it's considered still weak because it hasn't broken this, some major highs here yet. So in my mind, I'm still waiting to see further development, but I have an idea of what's going on, right? So what I'm going to do here is the most recent breaks, we have this area here. So for example, we take the low and then we take the high. So here I have this line that I'm marking out. We're going to go ahead and put break of structure, and I'm going to make sure that I label this as daily, right? Now we don't necessarily need to see this EQ for the whole weekly swing, so I'm going to hide that now, right? But I can see we have this break to the downside, and then we also have this break. So at this moment, this is the most recent swing that I can find, right? And we can see that the daily structure is currently bullish, right? We broke structure. If I look at this, I need to see a full body candle closure to consider it a break. This, we form this high, we pull back, we break with a wick, no body, right? We get a body closure up here, but in my mind, that's not something I'm considering. I want to see it like this. I want to see a high probability range like in my supply demand video, right? That's how I get the best quality POIs. So in my mind, this is not strong. It's showing weakness, and as you can see, we end up sweeping that level, right? It looks like the previous week was showing some bearish intentions, but on the daily, we have this bullish engulfing candle that pushed back into the supply, right? So this is currently the bullish structure that I'm marking out on this demand zone. Now I'm expecting the supply zone to mark out let's say the bearish breaks of structure on the daily, right? So here I can see from this low, we were showing a pullback that was bullish, right? This was the last high that we caused that broke structure, right? So here we break structure to the upside. This is considered strong and protected, and then this gets taken. So that's a break of structure considered bearish, right? This low makes a high candle body closure, then it gets taken, candle body closure. High probability range, this is daily break of structure, and this is bearish, right? Now if I continue to look lower, what happens here? Where do we break out of the supply range? Here we break out with a wick. So if I'm looking at this zone here, from this low to this high, right, because this is the overall swing on the higher time frame, this high, then we break to the downside. What I can see here though is that we don't break on a body, we break on a wick. So in my mind, I still need to see where we break on body. So I'm going to put this as a dotted line because this is no closure, right? So I want to see where we actually get the body break. So we continue lower, we have this low, right? So we have this high to this low. Anything in here is complex pullback. We have not yet progressed outside of these ranges, right? We've tapped the extreme, but respected it. Then we push up with aggression and sweep it. Makes sense because this is considered weak as it failed to break. So we swept that, and then it looks like we break structure. So in my mind, we have this wick low. We look to the right, we close on a body. That's a break of structure. High probability range also, which if you watch my supply and demand video, then you're going to learn all about those and how I filtered to have the highest probability POIs, right? So right now, that's my daily structure. Here we broke structure. This is a reversal point. So I'm going to go ahead and put an arrow because I was strong. Here we failed to break. We caused a sweep of relatively equal highs. But at the same time, if I look at this, for example, and I drag this to the right, we still have a little bit more liquidity that we could sweep. So what I see here is I'm going to mark this as liquidity above. Even though this swept some liquidity, it still has some that are still above it. And so I could see this being liquidity for something a little bit higher potentially, right? So what else do I see here? So that's liquidity. We break to the downside. This is where we have commitment to break structure. Pause, we pull back, and then we break structure one more time. And then this is a sell to buy weekly range that creates this demand. And we're already seeing some hesitation at this moment. Now, what's important to note? In here, I can see that we sell to buy that makes that high. This is a change of character in a way, right? But one thing that I've noticed is we don't break on body. So what this to me looks like on this daily time frame is that this was a sweep of liquidity. And so what that tells me is also a sweep of liquidity and a sell to buy. The buy is engulfing to the sell, right? We're already showing some potential pullback off of here. So I'm unsure, but what this tells me overall is on this time frame, right now, this is weak. This failed to break daily structure. We swept it with a wick, but we did not break with a body, right? But we did tap into what? A weekly demand range, right? So look, came in, wicked into it. This was just below or just above, didn't tap. This one did, right? That's important to note. What else do I see? So this is considered weak because it failed to break. At this current moment, this has also not yet broken this high. So for the upcoming week, what can we expect? If we are going to be in consolidation, we will stay within this range. But it's unlikely, right? Especially we're daily bullish, right? The weekly is potentially shifting bullish, right? Now, because the structure on the weekly is still bearish, this could be a pullback. This might be exactly where we turn back around, right? We're looking at the EQ of the weekly swing. We've come just into it. So we're going to get some more analysis with daily supply and demand zones. But at this moment, these are weak, and we're going to see what actually gets taken. We're going to have to take either the low or the high. If we take the high, we come into this weekly supply range, which we have plenty of daily zones that we're going to mark out. And if we come into this daily, let's say into this, the weekly demand range, we know structure on the higher time frame is bearish from this weekly. So this could be, for example, targeting this low, and we could get a new break to the downside. We're not sure, right? We trade reactions, but we have to have an understanding of what is possible, right? So right now, that's what I see. So on the right side of my screen, I want to keep things organized. So I do one thing at a time. I've right now marked out all my structure. So I'm going to go ahead and label this and group it. Say daily market structure, MS, right? Because at this moment now I can toggle things on and off. Now, what's important for me to keep seeing? I don't need to see, we're about to mark out our supply and demand zones, right? So We're going to get into that right now. So I don't need to see the weekly levels anymore because I've already done my market structure. So I now have specific high probability zones where I want to mark my demand and supply. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look for every time that we break structure on the daily time frame, we're going to have a daily supply or demand zone inside that range. So I'm going to look at this most recent price action. We have this area here, right? This was the most recent break of structure on the daily. And what I'm looking for specifically is any area that specifically is a sell to buy, right? Or buy to sell engulfing that breaks structure. I would love if it has interaction. It usually will on a higher time frame, right? And if it sweeps liquidity and has inducement, then I consider it for an entry, right? At this current moment, we're on the daily. I can see that this was a daily break of structure. So the last sell to buy engulfing that left behind imbalance is going to be this one right here. At this moment on this time frame, I can't see if it swept liquidity, right? On the daily time frame, it has not, but maybe on another time frame where we will better refine this, maybe it has, right? So right now, this is our daily POI. This one is the best one because it specifically broke structure and has imbalance. If we look at this one here, maybe it has some interaction here, but we don't have an imbalance here very much, right? At least not on the daily time frame. Anything in here probably on the 4-hour would be cleared up, and we would look at that then. But it doesn't have an imbalance. It does not directly break structure, so in my mind, I'm not considering it. What else? I'm going to look at the next structure. Here we have a supply, and if I looked at the entire range, this is the high probability range, right? So now what I'm looking for specifically to narrow down on what area is responsible for breaking structure or took liquidity, right? I want to see, in this case, a buy to sell engulfing that breaks structure, has interaction, sweeps liquidity, right? And has inducement, that's for later use, right? But at this moment, what do I see? This was a low, and when we get candle body closure, what directly caused that? Well, we could say this entire area caused it. We can go ahead and say, for example, well, this wick swept liquidity, and it's a buy to sell engulfing. We have tons of sell orders stacking in here, so much so that on a daily, we compressed this candle all the way down here. So we do have a lot of liquidity up there. But at the same time, while this engulfed and ate 1, 2 candles, this is what directly broke structure. Because we closed one day, opened another day, pushed up higher, triggered something that caused a more stacking into this wick, and then this is what directly broke structure. Then we have the following 1, 2, 3, 4 daily bearish candles. So this is my daily buy to sell wick. And it looks like we've already gotten a reaction to this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and mark this daily. And if it's a wick, I'm always going to put a W, right? Because I want to understand what exactly it is, right? If it's clean POI, I might change it, right? Now here's the other thing here. In this area, I'm going to teach you a little trick. This is probably something that maybe you've already done or you don't do, right? When I see something like this, a long wick that sweeps liquidity, well, first of all, we have resting liquidity above. So I could see highly likely that price could come up and sweep that and take that out, right? So at this moment, what I'm seeing in this zone here is I'm seeing that, well, we also have this area that specifically was buy to sell engulfing. So what I could do is I could go ahead and narrow something like this and say, well, if price comes into here, I could see potentially maybe taking a trade, right? Because this is what directly, after we sold here into this wick, right? We closed here, opened a new candle, right? And we have this buy to sell that actually engulfed, right? So on this time frame, I'm going to go ahead and say daily wicks, right? Now, of course, this is the entire range, right? But I want to clean this up because these gaps are not as important. For example, in here, what do I see? I'm going to use this yellow color to point it out, but I see an imbalance here. Look at this. We have a fair value gap between those two wicks. That's an imbalance specifically for this POI, right? Now, below here, for example, we could say that we have an imbalance for this, right? Now, of course, that's already been filled. We already come and tapped into this area, right? So in a daily POI, what do we need to see? 4-hour change of character to begin taking shorts, right? Now at this moment, we're just doing this. We're not really looking at this yet because that's outside of our zone. But this is a trick. Now, the other trick that I wanted to show you, this is something that I do that I found works high probability. When I have very long wicks like this, a lot of times I've noticed that people usually mark out the entire wick like this as the specific POI. One thing that people forget is when we cause a sweep, what happens is anything above that sweep is going to be what's unmitigated. So in this case, even if this hasn't been tapped yet, well, we had this high, we pulled back and we swept that. Usually what I can do is I can refine this to the previous candle wick. And in my mind, usually this is the area that holds better. It never really comes into this little gap because this, we have the wick high, this is the liquidity POI. And on a lower time frame, it's going to make sense, right? So one of the tricks of using wicks is if you understand what actually happens between wicks, you don't necessarily need to drop down time frames, right? So daily wick, or I could say liquidity POI, right? That's a specific liquidity POI. And of course we swept here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that out as well. To mark, let's see, liquidity swept, right? Just to keep that in mind. Now would I mark this here? No, because realistically this is an area that's still unmitigated and just above this one. This is, it has to be the previous candle for when I use this. It's not going to be all the way over here, right? Excuse me. So now that we have this area marked out, those are our daily refinements. Now the daily range is this entire thing, but these are refined zones that have imbalance, right? Now what else? If I look to the left, I have all these relatively equal highs, right? Some supply chain that got swept, liquidity POI here. If this holds, that's great. If it doesn't, it's going to come higher. So what I can see here, for example, is we have a sell to buy. This POI specifically sweeps liquidity to the left, right? So, for example, sweep, and then what do? We take off. Price breaks structure to the upside, forms that new high, candle body closure, right? And then what do we have? Here we have a reversal. So this is the first buy to sell engulfing, engulfs that sell candle. Now, would I want to mark something like this? One thing that I see is, well, this is where we have commitment. We really don't have a big imbalance here. We don't really see we can see that the buys were clearly stronger in this case, while sells are overpowering that one buy candle. This is pretty weak price action. I can see the price pauses, forms this doji, and then drops, comes back down lower here. And even then, what do we have? We're tapped into this demand, right? If you want to get a visual on that, let's just going to keep it red though. But here you can see this was the demand. Price taps in, forms a flip on a lower time frame. That's why we understand wicks. Buy to sell, engulfing that directly breaks structure. So in my mind, I can say that these wicks are what directly broke structure. And hey, the interesting thing about this is it has all that resting liquidity just below that POI. Will it hold? I don't know, right? But the idea behind this is I understand why this makes sense. This directly broke structure. This one directly broke structure. Look how it's already being respected. Important. Daily zones are always going to give good reactions for the 4 hour because the daily is so strong. And so usually what you're going to find is the higher time frame always basically rules the lower time frame. So you're not trying to take trades on the 15-minute that will break strong 4 hours. It usually doesn't work out very well, right? But so your idea here is 4 hour, or if daily is stronger than 4 hour, 4 hours stronger than 15-minute, 15 minutes stronger than 1 minute. You'll usually get a reaction off of those, right? So this is super clean, super organized. This one, not as important. I'm going to keep it there, but I'm not really going to label it because it's not that important. So at this moment, on this time frame, if we look at these POIs, how far are we away? We are about 120 pips from that daily demand, and we are, well, to take the high, we're about 70 pips to make a new high. At this moment on this time frame, just to remind you, this is weak. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as a no closure. And, you know, we don't have to keep it, but just to keep in mind, right? And then potentially what is the target on the daily time frame? This high. So I'm going to put a wick. Or sorry, I'm going to put black dotted lines here because this is pending, right? Now the high is weak. the low is weak. The difference is who's in control. Supply is in control. Supply has been tapped at this moment, right? So, but again, if we look, because we can toggle our POIs, the supply range is still higher. So we do have a lot of reason to potentially come higher, right? So understanding that structure on the daily is bullish, but order flow is showing bearishness, right? So there's no alignment there yet. So now we're going to go to the right side of the screen and we're going to organize this because we want to be as organized as possible so that we can go ahead and toggle back and forth from all of our zones. So I'm going to label this supply, demand, SD, daily, right? All right, so now what are we going to do? This is the important part because this is where we understand the higher time frame. We have an idea of what is possible and where we could be heading, right? If we turn back on, for example, to understand the, let's say the last week's range, this was the last week's range. You see that? That's what we can see. At this moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the 4 hour. So the 4 hour, so here what we're going to do is we want to take a look at this now on with our daily POIs marked out, right? So we understand daily structure. And now what we're doing is we're looking at daily structure and POIs on the 4 hour. And so our goal here is as every time frame that we drop, we're trying to refine. So the same way that we started with a weekly zones and we refine those to daily zones, we also want to refine our daily zones to the 4 hour. And the idea behind this is we're trying to narrow down where we can get our entry. To me, it doesn't matter a daily zone all the way down here because we're probably not going to come to that in 1 week, right? It takes time, especially when price is bullish. So what I'm trying to do is narrow things down. For example, like the weekly zones. How long is it going to take one of these weekly zones? To make a new weekly low or weekly high? Excuse me. It's going to take a long time. Same with daily. You think we're going to take all of these daily zones in 1 week? It's probably not going to happen as often as you think, right? So what we're trying to do is narrow things down. So now what we're focusing on is instead of looking at price action all the way up here and all the way down here, we're looking at the most recent likely to get reacted zones, right? So what we're doing is we're narrowing things down. Right now what I'm going to start with is structure. So 4 hour structure. As I always start, I start with structure and then I start to move to POIs, right? And order flow. So first things first, I'm going to mark structure out leading into this most recent impulsive swing, right? So I look at this daily area. Every time that I have these POIs, I'm trying to refine these to the 4 hours. So I need to do structure on there, right? So at this moment, right, we have that the most recent breaks in this daily area here, if we're going to refine this, is this was a 4 hour break of structure, right? So we made this high, we pulled back, we break structure on a full body. And in my opinion, I'm only focusing on high probability ranges, which means it has to break on a body. If it doesn't, I'm not going to consider it for myself a break of structure, right? Now it could do so after, and that's a little bit different. I will go into that another time, right? If we see it this time, I'll go into it, right? Now I can look lower and I see a nice pullback that also did the same, right? So this is a 4 hour break of structure. So in my mind, right, if I didn't see all this current price action, what would I say? If this was the most recent swing, then I'd say, okay, 4 hour structure is bullish. If this goes, we're bearish, right? But then we made a new 4 hour break of structure. So now at that moment, 4 hour structure is bullish in this leg. If this 4 hour went, then it's gone, right? Then if I look higher, for example, I'm looking up here, we have this high, we pull back, we make a new high, right? At this moment, what happens? We make this high. Technically, if this goes, we're showing some bearish intentions, right? What happens here is we end up getting a break of structure that's bearish. Now, here's the thing. Is this a good pullback? It's really not a good pullback. Would I classify this? I personally wouldn't necessarily want to. It does sweep liquidity of this area here, which is great. I remember trading this area. This was a targeted zone. I took a short, I think, in here once to try to take a low there. What else do I see? So in a way, this is like a bearish break, right? So I can go ahead and label this 4 hour was bearish, right? At the same time, what does that say? Well, if the 4 hour is bearish at this moment, this is supposed to be protected. And if this goes, then it goes bullish, right? Well, it goes and it gets broken on body. So that's a high probability range, 4-hour break of structure. Once again, if you don't understand what high probability ranges are, watch my supply demand video. It's very helpful on this topic, right? So now, what do I have? This low, break structure to the upside. If this low goes, right, then I have a break of structure that's bearish. Now, what do we remember? This is what? A daily. So I'm going to actually just put a little label on here because I don't want to get confused with this. So I'm going to say that's a daily. I'm going to mark this with, it's going to be at the left center. Oh, whoops. This is going to be at the bottom, and it's going to be in the center. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I label this black. Did not go through. Daily. There we go. Awesome. So what else do we have? So this is the 4-hour, right? If this went, then we have a break. Now that's interesting, right? This is supposed to be protected. It made this new high. We could argue, for example, that we do have, this would be one big swing, right? Here we have a 4-hour break of structure. So on the daily time frame, it's not a break, but on the 4-hour it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this to the top, and I'm going to keep this at the bottom so that they don't get mixed up too much. All right, that's a little bit more clean. Just going to drag that across. And what I want to do is I'm going to put daily sweep. All right, so that way I have an understanding what it looks like on those time frames. Because this is not a daily break of structure bearish, the daily still continues to remain bullish with market structure, right? Current order flow, we're still developing that. Daily structure is 4-hour order flow. Or sorry, daily structure, the order flow for daily structure is 4 hours, right? That's the order flow. All right, so this low goes. What does that tell us? This is the extreme high, right? The extreme high. I could say that this is one big swing to the downside. Now, internally here, I could, for example, say, I could start to question, okay, well, was this a break? This is not a high probability range. It broke on a wick. So in my personal mind, I would not use that, for example, as a break of structure. We do get a break up here, but when I see something like that, that tells me immediately, if I don't get a high probability range developed, if it's not on a body, tells me that this is immediately going to be weak. And you can see that we did sweep that, right? So in my mind, the shift bearish occurred here. Now, I could say this is a break of structure, but realistically, I would want to see the break of structure here, and it already happened, right? So in my mind, what I'm just going to say is I'm going to use this as a change of character zone. Because the way that I see it is, this is still one big swing. We pulled back, and then we break to the upside, and that gets taken, that helps make that new high, right? And this is a good pullback, right? Now on here I see that I have this 4-hour demand, right? And we do get tapped into that. Now I'll go ahead and mark that out later, but it's not necessary for right now because we're still in the structure category, right? So 4-hour structure it begins to shift, but we have a break of the extreme, right? So this is a very strong indication of bearish intentions here, that the 4-hour is shifting bearish, right? Now at that moment, what do we have? We have this low, we pull back. How aggressive is this pullback? It's not a very aggressive pullback in a way. It goes 66 pips. This doesn't engulf necessarily. We do come back to sweep liquidity. And I took a trade on Asian session. During this time, I have a breakdown in my free coaching videos on my Discord group. Price comes into this. We could even mark out some structure in here. Well, we're going to do that later, right? We're a little bit early in that. But we're just trying to understand structure here. So the way that I see this, that we pull back, we form this high, and then what do we do here, for example? And actually what I can do is I can go and mark it like this. That way that we take the high, we take the low, right? Good change of character there. Price then pulls down. We make this extreme of this pullback, right? We break structure to the downside. This is considered strong, right? Because it broke structure to the downside, but then it gets taken. So in a way, this shifts price action bullish, right? Does this break on a body? It looks like it maybe doesn't break on the body exactly. Maybe it does. I'm going to mark this as a change of character for right now, right? Because this is basically a buy to sell that makes this low, break structure to the downside. If we break this, which we do have candle body closure above, then that's bullish, right? So this shows bullish intentions. At the same time, we already see that we're getting a pullback, right? So what we want to do is we want to get some more clarity on what's happening here. So at this moment, what we're going to do is we're going to focus more on further development of structure as we did in this demand. We're going to look at the supply, and then we're going to come back to this area to understand what's happening, right? So we're going to look at these daily supply zones, right? So what I'm focusing on here is I'm further focusing on creating where the high probability range is and getting that clean break of structure. So I'm looking at each of these. We form this weak low, right? We pull back, fail to take a high, and then we break structure to the downside. Makes that supply zone on the daily time frame, right? Looking at this one, and then let's look at the one above here. We have this area here too. This is the low. We make this new high. We fail to break structure on the 4-hour, but on the daily it's also a sweep, right? And then we push back down into this flip, and then we break to the downside. Full body candle, break of structure on body, high probability range. Also, now if you remember that trick I told you, said we want to focus on the area where we have the previous wick. We cover that. Makes sense because the way we look at this is the flip, and the flip already was mitigated. We see a small imbalance here, but at the same time, more of the focus will probably be on the higher PA up there, right? Now, whether we choose to focus on this or that, it's right now we're kind of far away from that. So what I'm going to do is I currently have structure marked up, right? So now that I have 4-hour structure, I have an understanding of what's going on. 4-hour, we broke in the low, right? Here we broke another low, right? Hopefully I'm not confusing you by going back and forth. This is supposed to be very raw. It's very like unplanned. But this is how I do my structure and what my thought process is. I'm constantly going back and forth. I could say that this was the break to the downside. Also, we have the break here, which is a change of character. Here we have a change of character. We could also maybe say it's a break. Depends if that hits the body. Doesn't really look too clean. I wouldn't change that too much. But we have this extreme 4-hour here. So we're going to look into that in a minute. At this current moment, let's now mark out our supply and demand zones. So what we're going to do is we're going to organize, go to the right side of the screen, highlight all the fresh markups, group them together, and we're going to call this 4-hour MS market structure, right? So at this moment, what we're going to do is we're going to now focus on our POIs, right? And so what we're going to look for is the 4-hour demand and supply zones inside the daily and then in current price action, right? So at this moment, if we pull back into this area here, right, which we see right now at this moment, this is considered weak, but it's on the daily. This is weak on the daily as well. If price comes into here, where can it come into? Well, the extreme is always valid, right? I could see price come into here. Now, would I want to refine this to the wick? I could refine this to the wick. At this moment, based on how price action is developed, I don't mind having a larger zone here. Because I don't have a clear sell to buy. I'd have to look at a different time frame. In my opinion, this doesn't look like the best POI either, but we're going to mark it out because we want to see what happens if price comes to here, right? Next thing, I want to see in this area what caused direct break of structure. So if I look at this, we break full body candle. If I look here, where do we have that previous pause? Now I can do two things. I can mark this candle in here where we paused, but the reality is where we actually caused the break is in this wicks, sell to buy. So I'm going to do the same as I did earlier. I'm going to focus on those wicks. Now, I might not label it. When it's on a lower time frame, I don't even put the W on it for wicks. I just mark it out because what happens if I see, let's say this is 4-hour, right? So if on the 15-minute I see price come in and tap and respect it and give me a change of character, I'm going to take a buy, right? If I see price come down, sweep it, that's a target for liquidity because it doesn't have any inducement at that moment. If it sweeps it and then I get a change of character, I will take a buy. But it's something that I'm eyeing, right? Sometimes, for example, if I have my 4-hour POI all the way down here, right, and I see price coming to tap the top of the daily, I might miss the trade. But if I understand that this is where the volume and momentum was injected to directly break and form this massive engulfing that broke daily structure and 4-hour structure, this is going to be a very interesting zone to look for. So I really want to just keep in mind that if something happens there, I'm taking it, right? Now I can look a little bit lower here. This is also 4-hour structure. Now this is much lower because this is in a daily zone, highly likely that that's going to give the reaction. But I also like to see that here we have a sweep of liquidity, right? So we swept liquidity and then continue to the upside. So this is a sell to buy where we have 1, 2 engulfing candles that broke structure directly. So this is a 4-hour POI without refinement. Am I going to refine these areas? I don't need to. The reason why is because we're currently far away from those areas, and on Sunday the price is not going to immediately drop 200 pips or whatever. So what I want to see is, for example, if price goes bearish, then what I'm going to look for is the most nearest demand, and I will do refinements there. If price comes in higher, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do refinements in this area for this supply, because this is the most recent place where we can get reactions from, right? So we're still a little bit early to do big refinements, unless we're closer to the POI. So now that we have the demand marked up, we're going to look at supply. So in these areas, we have a couple areas we can specifically look for. These are all daily supplies. So what I want to know is, where did we break structure, right? What swept liquidity? What got engulfed? Where's the imbalance, right? So here, for example, I can narrow the 4-hour from the weekly. I can say, for example, here, we made this low, we paused, we didn't directly break until here, right? So this directly caused break of structure. What happens though is we don't see on the 4-hour a sweep of liquidity, and on the 4-hour we also do not see that this has inducement. So not likely to get respected, and as you see, price is already trading, or was already higher than that. We didn't even get a reaction to this area, so you know, that's no longer what we're looking at. We're looking at something that's unmitigated, right? So this area is considered the extreme. So instead of looking at this entire zone now, I can look specifically at this. Now, how would I treat this? Okay, if price comes into a daily point of interest, I need a 4-hour change of character. We got that. 4-hour change of character. We can take a trade off of this to go short, right? If price comes into the 4-hour refinement of that daily, I need a 15-minute change of character. So I will always prefer to take the more refined route, because I can get a more aggressive entry with a smaller stop loss and a better risk to reward. Now, if it doesn't come into here, that's why it's important to keep your daily zones. A lot of people are not going to catch trades because you're going to think that the 4-hour is this, and that's not the whole 4-hour zone. We could refine things a lot better, right? At least this is the buying that got engulfed, right? So even up to here, we could have refined it. And if you look on the wick, for example, here, this is where we came into tap and we gave that reversal, right? So I really like to have those daily zones because it gives me a lot of clarity and cleans things up very well for me, right? So let's go ahead and drag these out a little bit further, and we're going to continue adding to these. Whoops, I moved that one. Drag that out here. Right now, this is the unmitigated refinement. We've already come into the daily, so unless we come into this 4-hour, you know, I'm not looking at that. Now, if we look a little bit higher here, for example, we have this flip, broke structure, but the buy to sell that engulfed and broke structure has already been mitigated. So in my mind, this isn't what I'm looking for. I would probably look, though, at this wick, right? Whoops. This wick here, I could potentially look at. Now, is this something that I really would like to consider? Not in the best case scenario. I could say that this is going to be liquidity for that wick if it happens. But what I'm going to do is I'm still going to mark it out because it was a buy to sell engulfing. At this moment, I don't really see that it left behind imbalance. I'm not liking it, but if price comes into there, I'm willing to take a trade if it gives me the right moves, right? So what I'm going to do is the same thing as before. I showed you that I will take the previous wick. That's where we got that sweep, right? So I'm going to mark this out as a sweep. And then I'm focusing from that wick high to this wick high. And that's my 4-hour zone. I'm going to say it's a wick, right? I'm going to drag this out across. I guess I might have to pull these out a little bit further. There we go. We'll do it like this. All right. Now in here, in my mind, I'm not going to mark this out too much because I'm not a fan of price action. The buy was very strong and engulfing, and we failed to break structure with the extreme. The extreme pushed price back into this demand, created the flip that then broke, and we already mitigated that. So the wick is unmitigated. This is not something I'm focused on taking right now. I'd rather see how price behaves at these levels if we get into there. Since right now price is bearish, at least on this 4-hour, showing that We broke structure, but now we're kind of showing some hints that maybe we're bullish. We're going to see what happens. I don't know if we're going to blow through this that quick, right? So maybe, maybe not. So right now, that's what I'm okay with marking out. So I'm going to go to the right side of my screen and I'm going to save current 4 hour supply and demand, so 4 hours SD. And now I have this very well organized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this on this 4 hour time frame and I'm going to hide all of my markups, because now I want to understand on the 4 hour all of the current markups that I had. So if I look at the weekly, I can say, okay, this was a supply range, yet to tap into that. Here's the demand range. We just came in to tap that weekly demand range. We swept into it, took liquidity. We at this moment gave another change of character. So this could be enough to satisfy that. We tapped the top of the range. We've pierced the EQ of the weekly swing and we've changed character. That's a sign of bullish intentions, right? Now, focusing only on the most recent weekly range, we have this high to this low that broke structure. So the week was mostly showing bearish intentions. But at the end of the week, we had this very aggressive push back up. So at this moment, we're not very clear with price action. Realistically, in here, price is a little bit messy. So in order to avoid taking losses, what I'm going to do is I'm going to understand that we could potentially be starting some sort of range, or who knows what's going to happen in here. What I want to do is I'm going to mark out with the 3070 tool this. I technically, in my mind, only feel comfortable taking trades at either in the 30 or 70%. So in order to have the highest probability setups, I'm only focusing on the extremes. I don't want to trade in this. And the reason why is because, well, we have a break of structure on the 4 hour that's very strong, right? It's a daily sweep, but we break structure to the downside. I could say that this area caused break of structure, but what initially shifted price bearish is that extreme. So from this high to this low is the actual swing that I'm looking at, right? So I'm going to put this little tool there to indicate this is a strong reversal point, right? Now, what we could be seeing is that this could be structural inducement, and we broke structure to the downside, and this could be liquidity for a POI above. So now if I turn on my daily POIs, right, I can now see what we could potentially be targeting. This could be a early seller's trap to get price to give us a better, let's say, better inducement of liquidity for coming into the weekly range, right? If I look at daily market structure, it's not as relevant because we're currently not seeing much, but what we do see with daily structure is that we have weak lows and weak highs at this current moment. So it's very easy to take either side. Now, we are how far from the most recent daily POI? 125 pips, and we are from making a new high 60 pips. So we're much closer, and current let's say order flow was showing potential to make, let's say, a new high, right? But we're already kind of maybe hesitating here. So at this moment, the 3070, that's going to give me some insight for potentially what I could be expecting. So I'm just thinking about that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and turn on my 4 hour structure. So I can turn that, toggle it on and off. I don't need to see the weekly, so I'm going to hide that. You can see how organized you can get when you have this set up. Because I have structure marked out, I can go ahead and get some clarity on these 4 hour POIs. And then I can hide the daily, right? We've given a reaction to the daily right now. Daily supply and demand, I don't need to see that right now. Maybe the only one that I would consider leaving on would be the one that we've given the most recent reaction to. So which one would that be? It would probably be, I guess if I turn them on here, whoops. Which one is this one? All right, that's the third to the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this one on because that's where we've gotten that reaction from, right? So at this moment, that's what I can see. This is the area, the range of the high to the low, 3070. Let's go ahead and jump from 4 hour to the 15-minute, right? So what I'm going to do now, we're going to drop to the 15-minute and kind of get some more insight on what potentially we could be seeing here. All right, so one thing to keep in mind is when we see higher time frame trend, pro trend alignment, when we see the daily and the 4 hour are both in alignment, The problem with that is that price is going to be extremely impulsive and aggressive. So when you see alignment of daily and 4 hour, that's showing commitment to a direction. So if we are pro trend on the higher time frames, daily and 4 hour, right? Then we can expect that if we see high volume and momentum, it's going to be with commitment. And so that's going to make 15-minute structure very messy, and it's not going to give you the best POIs, right? It's also not going to respect a lot of zones. As you can see here on this current structure, for example, let's hide this range. If we look at, this is 4-hour markups on the 15-minute. This does not look clean. We don't see any corrective buildup of liquidity. We don't see like anything like this. We're basically seeing stuff like this happening, and then price is dropping very aggressively, and it just, that when high volume and momentum is injected into the market, because we have commitment, we don't create pullbacks, right? And so that's kind of going to give us a harder time to do our clean markups. If we look at this area here, for example, the 15-minute here is very clean. For example, when we break structure, we can see where we have defined points of liquidity that's structural. We find a lot of areas where we could potentially take entries from, right? This is clean structure. We like this. We target the 4-hour high, right? This is clean structure. But once we start to get to this, price is rolling over with aggression. And once liquidity enters the market, high volume, we see massive drops. This doesn't really give us that opportunity, right? And so when I see price action like this, I don't like to mark out too much structure because I'm not really seeing the best quality zones here. Now, the other thing is, for example, where are my 4-hour zones? I only have high quality 4-hour zones up here and down here. And so in my mind, looking at current price action, right? Let's look at the 4-hour again, because we know that the 15 minutes not very clean. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to try to see if we can find something in here. So this is one swing to the downside that broke structure. So in my mind, I can say, okay, well, technically the extreme is going to be pretty strong here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can get some justification for what's going on here from where, right? So at this moment, I can see here that when we took this high, we have a doji candle in here, and this is a demand zone, right? So here we have a demand. Let's mark that out properly, right? Price came in to tap that, created a doji, so that's forming a reaction, which is giving us what? A flip. This is a demand to supply flip. Price breaks structure to the downside, comes back to mitigate, respects, and breaks structure to the downside. Okay, so what do I see here? In here, we're forming what? A buy to sell engulfing. So I can go ahead and mark out this entire area here and drag this to the right. That's going to be a 4-hour supply that breaks structure. It has no inducement of liquidity, so it's considered weak, right? It's probably going to go, and it does go. All right, so we have that understanding, right? We break, we close below here. That's the extreme high. If we look at this, we can go ahead and say, well, the extreme broke structure, and this candle directly engulfed this sell to buy, right? So I could say this would be the highest quality 4-hour, right, in this current move, right? So if price comes into here, I could consider taking shorts, right? At the same time, what do I see? Maybe this could be considered a flip. Not really my best quality POI. It did not have any inducement, so I did not expect it to hold, and I'm not expecting it completely to hold, right? But we have currently a flip here. At the same time, understanding if we turn back on the 30-70 range, what do we have here? This would be an area where we could look potentially for weak buys. This would be an area for strong sells, right? But on the daily time frame, we still know both of them are weak, right? So at this moment, if we do get a pullback, for example, this did break 4-hour structure, right? But this is part of the swing that broke on this side too. So technically, at this moment, this doesn't have any inducement of liquidity. So it's considered weak in my mind, but I would like to see what happens, right? If price comes down into here, I know that this is the extreme of this range. We broke structure down here, so I could see this going. At the same time, it depends, who's in control at that moment. Right now, daily supply is in control, and we don't have a 4-hour we're not, 4-hour demand hasn't been tapped, because at this moment we broke 4-hour structure, right? We had 4-hour demand in here, right? And we have this demand we can mark out specifically, right? This was a sell to buy, broke structure. Last sell candle that swept liquidity before all these buys. Price came into here, give a flip again, right? Broke that. So at this moment, this is the extreme low, right? So we have that low, and we have this high. Technically, this one's considered strong. So if we take this high, we're aligning bullish, right? If we break this low, right, that makes sense because current structure has bearish break of structure, and the next 4-hour demands aren't until we come back lower. So at that moment, we could see a potential, weekly alignment bearish. All right, so what we're gonna do now is, now that we have some of this structure marked up, we're gonna jump back to the 15-minute and see if we can see anything. All right, so now that we have the 15-minute, let's take a look to see what we can find. Now, as I mentioned already, when we have alignment of the higher time frames or the highest time frames, price is going to be very impulsive and commitment is going to be very strong, giving us poor structure on the 15-minute in many cases, right? I personally trade 15-minute structure, so I like to see clean 15-minute structure. So what we're going to do is, it doesn't really matter too much what's happened prior. At this moment, we have, this is current price. So price is either going to come lower or it's going to come higher, right? So we don't need to mark 15-minute structure in here and past price action, because the most recent swing, excuse me, I have the hiccups now. I'm going to mark this big swing to the downside, just so that we have an idea of what that swing is at the current moment, right? Now, we do see that at this moment we have a change of character that's on the 4-hour, change of character bullish. So that's from the extreme of the 4-hour, right? So in my mind, seeing that, I'm expecting that when I get a break of structure, or let's say this change of character, we do have a body closure above. In my mind, what that tells me is we can expect a pullback. So the question is going to be, as we already marked out, the high or the low, which one's going to go? In my mind, I'm expecting the low to go, but at the same time, I can see so much aggression with buys, at least on this last push up here, that there's a chance that we could potentially just use this as a sweep and then continue higher. So what I'm going to do is I want to understand current structure. So heading into this peak, I want to know where we got that change of character that shifted price bearish, right? So for example here, I can see that we make this, we break to the high, right? Where do we go? We make this pullback, right? We take some liquidity, a little sweep in here, right? Price makes a new high. We pull back, take some liquidity. Price is kind of building in here, a little consolidation and accumulation, and then we break, create a new high. So in my mind, this is considered strong, right? So I'm going to mark this out, and sell to buy makes that high. I can go ahead and put this as a little 15-minute demand. It doesn't have any inducement of liquidity at that moment, so I'm not necessarily expecting that to have held, right? Price then makes another sell to buy, makes a new high, takes that new high, and once this goes, we have a change of character and a break of structure at the same time. So in my mind, I'm going to mark this as a change of character for the lower time frame, medium time frame, right? This is the bearish shift, right? So in here, technically this is within the 4-hour sell to buy, or buy to sell that got engulfed. So 15-minute in here does count. Now, because we've already had this happen, this is why we didn't mark it out. This is the new area that we have not tapped, right? So in my mind, I'm looking at this, right? And I can see why specifically this area held up. This got respected. So in my mind here, what I'm going to mark out is that this was a 15-minute point of structure, and this is the last 15-minute structure here before we broke to the downside. So after this, we began bearish, right? So if this went, I would have seen a 15-minute break of structure or change of character, right? But after that, we continue to take new lows, right? So here we break on wicks, so I'm not marking that out. We push to the downside, we get a little pullback that takes some liquidity, comes back to mitigate this supply, right? And then breaks to the downside, right? We get a little pullback and then we break to the downside. Price comes into this previous demand that's part of a flip, right? And what do we get? Price very aggressively pushes to the upside, gives us a change of character. But in other words, what do we get? No closure, we sweep. So we swept liquidity, right? So this gives us something to think about. When we sweep liquidity like this is not an invalidation, but a violation. Invalidation would be when we get a body candle closure above the previous wicks. When we get wicks above previous wicks, in my mind, I consider that a violation. So that just swept liquidity. So in my mind, the question is, usually we like to trade away from sweeps. If this swept liquidity and then broke structure, that would be a strong sign that we are going to continue bearish, right? But what we did get instead is that price very aggressively pushed for sweeps and failed to take the low. So what that immediately tells me is on this 15-minute time frame, this is considered weak, right? So we're going to say, do I have something on here? I'm just going to say 15-minute weak. I'm going to make this smaller, right? That makes sense. Awesome. Maybe I'll just cap it. Cap box it, weak. There we go. All right, so 15-minute weak failed to take the low. At the same time, what does that tell us here? This low failed to take the high. Here we have a buy to sell, right? We do break this one, right? But we don't take this one. So at the same time, it's still considered weak. So this is also 15-minute weak. So in my mind, 15-minute structure is a little tricky when I see price action like this. So what I want to know is, okay, in my mind, technically, this is the extreme of the 15-minute that hasn't been tapped, right? So if I'm going to see a change of character in this very aggressive range, I want to see this go, right? If I see this go, then I'm going to be looking for longs, right? Or I want to see what happens in this 4-hour, right? At the same time, because this 15 minutes weak, it failed to take the high at the current moment. If I see this go, right, I'm potentially looking for bearish entries, right? So this is kind of the range I'm looking at. In my mind, I don't want to take anything off of here because none of these POIs are clean. None of them have inducement of liquidity. None of them look like quality, right? This demand is considered weak at this moment. So I'm not buying from this area here. At the same time, I can see we have a sell to buy. This took liquidity, swept liquidity, tapped into this extreme, and then looks like it's shifting. So what I want to know now is I want to see what price looks like on the 5 minutes. So I'm going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to mark this as my 15-minute structure, market structure. So this isn't clean. I'm not going to take 15-minute POIs here. The only places where I will look for 15-minute POIs is in 4-hour zones, right? Now at this current moment, I'm not going to refine anything yet because it's just not clean yet. So I'm going to take a look at the 5-minute. Now, if you remember, I mentioned I don't trade. I'm not looking for 5-minute POIs at this moment that are going to change, let's say, structure necessarily, because at this moment, with what I'm expecting, because the 15-minute high and low is weak, we're in a complex pullback. And so I want to be very careful trading these areas. So I want to see some further development. I want to see more sweeps. So right now on the 5-minute, see, we took the low, we take a high, we pull back, right? It looks like we're mitigating something in here. What I'm looking for is, and I'm going to mark everything on the 5-minute in green. And the reason why is I don't want to mix this up with anything on, let's say, I don't want to mix this up with different time frames. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this in, let's see, what color should I do this? I guess I'll just go with a black line that's going to be thin. So I'm going to go ahead and do it like this. And I'm going to do dotted lines. Maybe, I hope you can see those, right? All right, so for example, looking at this area here, I can see that here we took the low, right? And then I can see that we take the high. So here we shifted bullish. So in this area, I can see that we have two zones, right? We have what looks like this supply, right? Price, this is the extreme, comes up, taps that supply, gives a reaction, sweeps liquidity, and then breaks that 5-minute. So I can say I want to look at this area here. drag this out to the right. You can see we've given multiple taps to here, right? So I want to mark out structure on here. So technically here, we made this low, right? What pushed to make that low? Here we have, this is the sell, right? And this would be the high that took that low, right? So when this high goes, for example, this would take the last buy to sell that made the lowest point at that moment, right? But then what do we have? We take this low here, right? So here we took that low. Let's zoom further in this. We swept that. So what caused that to sweep? So I'm looking for the change of character on this time frame, right? So this is the lowest point, right? We take that low, right? So this is the highest point that broke that low. So when this goes, we see that that goes bullish, right? So in my mind, right now at this moment, I'm seeing that price action on this time frame could be potentially shifting on the 5-minute bullish. We just took this low in this demand, so we swept liquidity. So that would basically require this high to go. If this high goes and then this one, right, I want to see what happens up in these areas, but that would shift the 5-minute bullish. At this moment, the 5-minute is in a range. So price action isn't the cleanest. I'm not really looking for too much there. Now, if I look at this on the 5-minute, I can see, was this a flip? We didn't get a flip. We tapped, pulled back, but we swept all of that even before we gave like a nice reaction. And then we break. So this isn't something I'm looking at. This area here, you know, we have a nice wick that's unmitigated in this area. This, what did it do? Push to the downside. We have some hesitancy here. We don't have inducement for this area, and it failed to break. So that's not something that I'm looking at. If I look a little bit higher in this area, we have this came in to tap that area, makes that high, pull back, makes a new high, pushes to the downside. Here, does this get tapped by that wick? That's where we came in to pursue for this point of interest. So I'm going to leave that there just because I'm going to eye to see if we swept this and what happens later, right? But that's something that we gave a reaction to on that time frame. So on the 5-minute, that's currently what I'm seeing. It's not clear in my mind. I want to see one of these levels go. I want to see clean 15-minute structure happen. So I see 2 weak areas that I would like to target first. So this upcoming week, I will be hesitant to in the first day to see. I will be very cautious about what type of entries I take. I want to see some clean structure, right? At that moment, that's what I have marked out. Let's wait for the 15-minute to load again. All right, there we go. All right, so at this moment, this is kind of what I'm seeing. This swing, I'm going to delete that because I don't need to see that anymore. So at this moment, it looks like we have all of our markups. Now, price action is not very clean on this time frame, so if we really wanted to get an idea, let's move to a slightly higher time frame. Let's jump to the 1 hour just so that we can get a view of our POIs, right? All right. So at the current moment, on the 1 hour time frame, this is where we're at. So if we looked at, do I still have this? All right, so this is the range of the swing, right? So we came into this premium, right, and we shifted bearish. So in my mind, there's a chance that we could, for example, align bearish intentions here now that we have this breakout structure on the 4 hour, and we could continue to take price lower, right? That's a chance. At the same time, we have a weak demand, right? It has yet to take this high, and price is already shifting bearish. There is a chance the price could come into here and potentially give us a buy, but we're not very sure. At this moment, I want to see how price reacts to if we come back up to this area, to any of these supply zones, or to the extreme. That's currently my markups. They're not the cleanest at this moment because price is a little bit messy, right? So we're just going to have to keep going to higher time frames to see what we can spot. But at that moment, that's how we do this. So hopefully this video made sense on how we did our markups, which stayed as organized as possible. You can see on the right side of the screen that we can go ahead and toggle things on and off so that we can really have clean perspective on what's happening. We don't really have any 15-minute POIs to refine because price action was very messy. And so in the 4 hours down here, we would consider refining things to the 15-minute. At that moment, we still have to take consider whether this high goes or the low goes and we pull back further, or we continue to, it's new bearish intentions off this daily, or if this was just going to be an early seller's trap that's going to take price higher, right? So we're going to be a little bit patient. I'm going to focus on the 4-hour zones, and I'm going to continue to eye daily POIs and see what happens, right? So let me know what you think about this video. I'm going to post these markups in the Discord. We're going to go over it a little bit more later, and once Sunday market open happens and we see a little bit more development during the week, we'll have a better idea of what we can take trades from. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. Hopefully it makes sense. Let me know if you have more questions, and we'll get into this further soon. All right, we'll talk to you soon, and I'm excited for the next video. Have a wonderful weekend.